Welcome to the epic highs and lows of D&D Villainy, also known as how to make memorable villains for pretty much any TTRPG table, but the epic highs and lows of TTRPG Villainy isn't as fun to say. So if you play anything other than D&D, hopefully you still can find ways to apply this at your table. There's actually not a single thing in here that we talk about that's exclusive to D&D. Oh yeah, my name. I'm Sloane. This is Liv.
Hello. Thank you so much. We are both DMs. We play in each other's campaigns. Sloane actually taught me how to play D&D, and she's the reason I got into DMing. I really look up to her as a DM, so it's an honor to be doing a panel with her, but also I'm going to kill her PC in the next game that we play, so sorry about that, Sloane.
You tried once.
Oh, I did try several times.
I've been DMing since about 2017, and those first few years, I think, as anyone who's been DMing knows, were really rough, and then suddenly you get the hang of it, and it's a lot better. So here are my and Liv's hard-fought lessons on what made our villains get better over time, and how you can bring it to your table and have those villains that your characters won't stop talking about.
So
Wait,
kind
hold
of,
on. This is a tight presentation. Yeah, those are two things we do have to say. This is a tight panel, so questions in the middle of it, while welcome, if they can wait till the end, please try to hold them.
We'd really appreciate it. We have a lot to say.
We've run over almost every time we've done this panel afterwards with questions, so we really try to keep the presentation tight, so then we can just like flow out into the hallway afterwards. Also, I guess mild body horror warning. There's art in this panel that Liv all drew, so when you go, wow, that looks cool, it's her. There are two slides. Does anyone have like a big issue with that? It's not gore, it's just some
body horror.
Also, there's a mature language warning on this, so I can say fuck.
Yeah.
There are some like just a couple that look a little fucked up, and if that's gonna make you feel some type of way, please tell us, and we'll at least give a warning. So like, speak now, please.
Anybody who's like,
I
need a warning.
won't make you hold your peace, but all right,
Perfect.
slay.
Excellent. Okay. So to get started, we're going to kind of break down what makes a great villain in general before we get into D&D specifics. And so we analyzed some of our favorite villains and talked about what we felt like made them very memorable and effective villains compared to every other villain out there in the world. And we broke this down into several different categories. So a great villain has a very strong and clear motivation. This is the reason why they do what they do. Every villain has righteousness or validation, which is why they feel right in doing what they're doing, even if they know that it's wrong. Or depending on the villain, they could also not know that it's wrong and just be going along for the ride. We've got the aesthetic. This is what usually makes people fall in love with the villains. This is, in the words of Megamind, presentation. It's that cool tower, it's the awesome armor, it's the horse, it's everything. It's all the cool stuff that they've got. We also broke it down into persistence. This is how driven they are to achieve their goals. This is what a lot of villains are known for, aside from the aesthetic, is that they are willing to stop at nothing to either stop the hero, conquer the world, whatever their goal is. The last one is optional, but it's becoming like increasingly popular in different media, is that you might see a sympathetic villain. So this is someone whose motivation and righteousness you might agree with, but their actual actions you don't agree with. They're the kind of people that you look at them and you're like, yeah, I get it. You didn't have to do it that way, but I get it.
And on that's y'all's right. You probably see some familiar faces and then at least one really unfamiliar face.
For sure.
Before I start talking about this, is anyone in here like really into Delicious in Dungeons and Dungeon Meshi? All right.
Oh, that's
amazing.
so many.
How many of you have not read the manga? Great. So
Cool,
I will
perfect.
keep the spoilers to 0. So we'll start with Azula. She's your classic villain. She's really the embodiment of ambition. That's really, in my opinion, what makes her so scary. Yes, she's skilled. She's not really sympathetic, but she stops at absolutely nothing. She is there when the Avatar crew is at their lowest. She's there when they feel like they're winning. She is there to just generally make their life harder, and it's really, really impressive that she succeeds almost every time. Then on the bottom, we have Jinx, probably the best example in current media of a sympathetic villain, at least in season 1 of Arcane. when you watch it, is really an exploration of like what happens when your trauma goes untreated, and when people are around you are making it worse. And she is also making everything worse with every decision she makes, but at the end of the day, she is trying her hardest to make it better. She wants to see her sister again. She wants to feel stable. She wants to not feel like she's going as crazy as she feels, but then you watch her do everything that she does, and you're like, no, honey.
That's not going to help,
Maybe
my dude.
not.
That's not it.
And on
Put
a
the
similar
gun
note,
down.
my favorite little guy on the top, not Thistle, but the other one, his name is Kilby. He's from a French cartoon called Wakfu, and if you've seen that, come talk to me afterwards.
It's really good. Hold on, it's really good. It's based off of an MMO, and you wouldn't expect it to be good. It's really good.
It's also a kid's show, technically.
It is technically a kid's show, but
Which
it
is
gets
crazy, given what I'm about to tell you. So, Kilby is a member of a reincarnating race, and he's the only member of his race that remembers his past lives. So throughout the show, you meet Kilby. He does not look like this. He looks very normal. And you're like listening to him, learning to respect him. And then he goes full mask off and is like, I'm going to commit genocide. Because he's watching the last surviving members of his race make the same mistakes he has watched in every other past life that nearly led to them getting wiped out. And so you're sitting there like, no, dude, I get it. Like, no one wants to have your people go extinct. But genocide, you're going to combat genocide with genocide? I don't think that's how that works. Maybe pull it back a little bit. So he also teeters on being sympathetic, but he's really not, because he's absolutely insane. But his aesthetic is amazing. I remember he came on screen after looking like this, and I went, huh?
Yeah, he spends most of the show just kind of looking like an old man in a cloak. And then suddenly he rips his shirt off and it's like, I've got tattoos and also I'm kind of ripped. And I'm like, okay.
But last but not least, we have Thistle, everyone's favorite mad mage. They are, once you get further into the manga, I will strongly argue that they are very sympathetic. I'm a Thistle apologist through and through. But their persistence in the anime truly makes them frightening. And you can tell that they feel so valid in everything that they do. Like, Thistle's not gonna stop. Thistle is not going to be someone you can sit down with and have a conversation and go, my guy, maybe like scale it back a little bit. He's genuinely a little off. And once you get further into the manga in the show, you start to learn a bit more about his motivation, his righteousness, and you start to realize, like, Thistle's not as bad as they seem, though. Also, as you get further in it, you're like, no, you're kind of off. But they're very compelling. I remember seeing Thistle show up on screen repeatedly, and that's what made me want to read the manga. I went, I need more of this messed up little dude.
There's a lot more.
He just gets better every single time. He is a villain through and through, and it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I also just really think that the way that Trigger like drew and translated Thistle into the anime is really great, because they really got across that intensity in every single scene that Thistle is in. And I know that, at least for me, is what made me pay attention to Thistle at first. And then the manga made me be like, okay, hold on, I'm obsessed. But what makes a good villain in general media is a little bit different from what makes a compelling villain in D&D and tabletop games. So we've split this into similar categories, but we've broken it down into personality versus mechanics, because there is that in-person and that stat aspect of villains in D&D. And so with personality, two of them are exactly the same. We have motivation and righteousness. Those are just kind of the same across the board with different characters. But then I've also added in characterization. So this is kind of back to high school English classes. This is your indirect and your direct characterization. So your indirect in the way that we're defining it here, because it's slightly different from when you're like written, because there's no narrator necessarily. Direct is like what the character is actually doing or saying, what the DM is saying about them. Indirect is their like reputation and what other characters are saying about them, or the impacts of their actions. And you can tell a lot about a character just by playing with these different things.
The second category we have is mechanics. So the first one is table presence. I'm sure we've all heard about it, but this is how you bring your character to life. We are not professional voice actors, we are not professional actors, but to really make your character feel real and alive, you gotta pretend. You gotta get into it. You gotta commit to the bit, essentially. If they have a funny little voice, you gotta do the funny little voice. If they're supposed to be this big, intimidating presence, come on, be a big, intimidating presence. I'm 5'2", and I scare my players all the time. If I can do it, you can. The second one is ruthlessness. I call this ruthlessness in strategy. Technically, this is instilling the fear of God in your players, both in combat and in RP. You can be mean and you can be ruthless as the DM in either. So can your characters. And it doesn't always have to be the same. There's actually, a spoiler, there is a character that we're going to talk about who is ruthless because Liv is ruthless, and they themselves are not trying to be cruel. But really going for the throat and making sure that by the time your characters and players are done interacting with them, they're like, I don't like that. I don't want to do that again.
I don't want to be in the room with this person anymore.
Yeah. And then the last one is stat block. Maybe combat's a better word for it, but creating a unique combat or giving them unique capabilities that really makes them stand out is really important to making your villains feel scary. If your bandit king has the same ability as every other bandit, what makes them the king? So playing with those expectations also and maybe switching it up in a way that your players won't expect, especially if they play a lot of D&D, can make your villains feel more memorable. Some pop culture examples that we have laid out. They're very different from our previous panel, if you've ever seen this before. Recently, I've gotten into Baldur's Gate 3 and Ketheric Thorm. Just the way that they introduce him, I understand it's not really a tabletop example, but it hits all of the points. You clearly get what his motivation is. His righteousness is a little fuzzy, but the characterization they do for Ketheric in his introduction, before you meet him, after you meet him and you get to Moonrise Towers, like just through and through, he's terrifying. And J.K. Simmons does a phenomenal job in that voice acting, so his table presence, the way he's animated, like he was built to be a scary guy. And then no matter how much you level, he's always going to be 2 levels higher than you, so the ruthlessness and stat block already come through. Similarly, we have Edward and Lydia from the Adventure Zone Balance. They're really a personality hire when we're talking about them. I don't even know that they got in combat.
I don't think they did at all.
I don't know, it's been a while. But they are such a good case study in table presence and ruthlessness. I don't remember really anything else about Balance in detail. I remember Edward and Lydia and going, no way, this is so fun. And I would listen to the Suffering game on repeat. And last but not least it's Strahd from this thing called the Strahdcast. And if you know what that is, great. I actually haven't even fully watched it. It kept showing up on my TikTok, and the DM was so good at playing Strahd that I couldn't scroll. The voice acting was there, he was up, he was moving, he was personalizing the dialogue to his characters and his characters' wants and motivations and fears. And he made Strahd as mean as Strahd is supposed to be. I've read a lot of stories online where people are like, Strahd just falls flat, and I'm like, after seeing the Strahdcast, I'm like, that is absolutely a skill issue. Yeah. Like, I've seen possibly the best Strahd in at least my realm of existence. And he was such a good case study in what can happen when you really lean into it and you do great direct characterization, great table presence, and you really do try to scare your players. I think I watched him kill one of the players just like straight up for no good reason, which was also just very Strahd-coded in general.
It's just alarming.
But it was phenomenal, and I don't think it's called the Strahdcast anymore, but I'm sure you could look it up if you wanted to like see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and this just goes to show, like, both of us homebrew, I think, almost all of our stuff, which if you end up playing with pre-made modules or things like that, you can still make, I'm so sorry, base. You can still make a villain really, really compelling by putting your own spin and your own personalization and your own table presence on it, just like with Strahd. We went to a roast of Strahd last night, and I learned a lot of reasons why people probably don't like Strahd in terms of like an actual D&D villain, but at least in the podcast that we both saw, like phenomenal table presence. And so with this, because this is an opportunity for learning, we have brought out, we're going to show you guys some of our villains that we've picked from our campaigns to kind of give examples of why we think they're memorable and effective.
Because we're players in each other's campaigns, we're also going to get mad about them. So one of us is going to present, and then the other one's going to go, yeah, fuck this bitch.
Just to make sure that we're not hyping ourselves up for no good reason. We want to give you the player perspective as well, because that's always important. So I'm going to be starting us off, since we're not... Yeah, you can sit, you're good. Since we're not doing any like body horror warnings or anything, we're fine, at least on the first slide. So this is one of my favorite villains that I did, like at the beginning of my campaign. This is Queen Arya Whitehorn. For some reason, her text is really small. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry about that, but it is Queen Arya Whitehorn. Not that her name is super important. The most important part is that she's a child. And when I made her as a villain, I wanted to create something for my players that seemed very straightforward. I wanted to create kind of a cut and dry villain, like someone who had very obviously done terrible stuff, who they were seeing the impact this person had on a kingdom, and then when they got there, they found a completely different situation. I wanted to jump scare my players with a child, is really what happened. And so the way that I did this is I was playing with indirect and direct characterization and making them contrast each other rather than aligning. So when my players first arrived on this kingdom, they saw that it was decimated. Like most of the people had died or in different disasters. The castle town was completely flooded and cut off from the rest of the land, so no one could leave over the water. All of the citizens were like slowly transmuting into instruments, which was painful and made them like lose their voice and their ability to move and things like that. And they learned from the characters and from the victims of these disasters that the previous queen had created a cursed crown that gave her the ability to like manipulate reality, and she had done this to her own people, that she had cut them off, she was transmuting them, doing all these terrible things. And really to emphasize that, I leaned into a lot of the body horror. You can tell what I'm a fan of. And so like I had them interact with a lot of people who were like halfway through transforming or who were kind of losing their ability to be human. And it worked. This indirect characterization of showing how the villain, the queen, had impacted this land made my whole party very aligned on they were going to kill her. Like, she had to die. They were like, she has absolutely ruined this place. She's committed blasphemy. Like, we have to save and rescue these people. But, and this is where the contrasting, like, direct characterization comes in, is that when they finally got to the castle and to hopefully kill this queen, they found out that the queen who made the crown actually died, leaving her 12-year-old daughter to inherit this cursed, incredibly powerful, reality-bending artifact. And it was just responding to her fear. All of the people were cut off from leaving the town because she didn't want to be alone again. All the people were turning into instruments and creating music with their breath because she couldn't handle the sound of silence because she started hearing voices. She just wanted all of the people to stay around her and be there forever, so they ended up being undead even when they were fully transformed into instruments. And so by showcasing, once they got there, having her direct characterization be so different from everything that they had heard up until that point, it really shocked my players, quite frankly. Like, it threw them into an absolute loop, which is what I really wanted. You'll get a player perspective in a minute, but essentially, three of my players were like, I don't care, she needs to die. And one of them was like, I'm not going to make this decision. I don't know if we should kill her kid or not. And the last one, who is Sloane, was like, we're not killing a kid. Like, she did not mean to do all of this. She just happened to have a really powerful artifact. You can't do that. So in order to achieve that kind of moral dilemma for your party, one, you have to have party members that have a variety of different morals. If you have all murder hobos or all saints, like, you're not going to go anywhere with it. You have to make sure your party has some variety. But two, you have to make sure that your villain stands directly in the way of the party making progress. Otherwise, they might just be like, eh. So in this case, they literally couldn't leave this kingdom until they had the crown. They had to take it from her, and then they had to decide what to do with her and what to do with the crown afterwards. And it caused such a conundrum in my party. We were playing in person, and we took breaks, and even during breaks, they were arguing about this. It is still relevant in my campaign. Like, I think we were playing on... Oh, I'm sorry. It's still relevant. You'll find out why later. But it's still relevant. We still bring it up to the point that, like, it is instrumental in Sloane's current character arc.
Unfortunately.
Yeah,
no, her being a child absolutely was probably the worst realization that could have happened. Granted, like, how do I put this? I play like a very morally upstanding character, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's very obvious. And then we stopped playing, and I realized Sloane was like, what is wrong with you? My actual real life friend that you want to kill this poor, like, pathetic child. She's 12 years old. Do you want to be held responsible for the things you did at 12 years old?
No.
No. We were playing on New Year's even, so we took a 15-minute break to like get ready and watch the ball drop. My friend was going to the bathroom. I was like, Caitlin, we're not killing the child. She's like, I'm not talking to you about this while we're not playing. Stop.
She said, I'm not on the clock. Come on, man.
It was really, really fun. It was very compelling, and it made us, the party, our own villains at that point, because then we were fighting each other. She really wasn't doing anything. She was just kind of standing there going, oh my God, they want to kill me?
Yeah, she was in the corner like, please don't hurt me. And they were all like,
yeah, foaming at the mouth. But I will say, technically, I did win, and that's really what's important.
that is true. They did not end up killing her.
It wasn't intentional. Something else happened, and she just kind of got forgotten. But that's a W.
We'll take it. She survived.
But really, the way that Liv characterized her and did all of this, it was so fun to have all of us aligned and on the same page of like, yeah, that's obvious. She's got to go. And then get there and suddenly have everyone just scattered. The fact that someone was like, I can't even, no, I'm not, hands off, is a testament to how much that like threw us into disarray. 10 out of 10 recommend. You should always be playing with characterization. If you're scared to run this like really bad, scary combat, make your players their own worst enemy and just play with the characterization. See what you can do without making the villain actually a villain.
Yeah. If you can show off the villain's desperation and the fact that they're trapped in their own situation, like with Arya, like with Jinx, like with a lot of other villains that we can see in different media, your characters are going to have to make hard decisions about how they're going to handle this person, and that always makes for interesting gameplay. Oh, my bad. Okay. This is my...
Wait, we didn't have to give a body horror word.
No, we're good.
This was one of them.
This is Watcher Prime. This is one of 3 BBEGs in my campaign, and so I wanted it to feel incredibly big and incredibly cosmic. And so to this point, I was trying to showcase the fact that it's utterly inhuman, that it can't understand human motivations, and that it wants to like trap and study the players, essentially. And so the way that I did this was I made their motivation directly contrast their ruthlessness. So I, as the DM, was trying to be mean. I was trying to be cruel.
Success.
I was targeting all of my players' like recent traumas and things that they had been to, not the actual like players, their characters. And I was pulling on all of these different strings and trying to corner them into really uncomfortable situations. But I tried to like contradict that with everything Watcher Prime was saying and doing. So I gave it extremely like flamboyant voice and table presence so that it came across like it was trying to be charismatic. And I was trying to showcase the fact that it didn't understand pain or human emotion, and so it couldn't be cruel inherently. It was just asking questions. It was just trying to see a reaction. And I was trying to showcase that through the fact that it is laughing at kind of inappropriate times. It's not quite in tune with what the players are saying. They can do their best to try to upset it, but it's not going to actually give in emotionally. And so I was really trying to get across that idea that that disconnect between the ruthlessness and the characterization, the ruthlessness and the motivation, so that my players got the feeling that this thing genuinely just didn't understand them, but they felt trapped with it. And that created the feeling of like fear and intimidation and discomfort. And so if you're trying to create something that is kind of an eldritch or cosmic horror, playing with that idea of this utterly inhuman thing that can't understand our motivations and playing with the other aspects of its character, you can achieve something really interesting that will make your characters very upset.
For context, because she didn't give an example, we're like in its domain. It just kind of said, boop, you're in my house now, and then big cosmic things. You don't really get a lot of power there. But the kinds of questions it asked were like, oh, hey, you just watched your mentor die for the second time. How do you feel about that? Just like completely casual. It's like, I don't understand why this would be problematic. Someone else is like, oh yeah, you haven't seen your parents in 15 years. Are you sad? Like just genuine questions that make you mad because it's like, what do you think? But also then when you're RPing a character that is actively upset about these things, like it just pushes on all of those buttons. What about Watcher Prime like really stood out though was that it made the characters uncomfortable, but when we were playing, because we play on Skype for this campaign, I legitimately watched one of our players just sitting there after interacting with this going.
There were quite a few times I looked up and people's heads were just in their hands.
Yeah, our friend Sarah, I remember after she finally gave up, she just threw herself back in her seat and was like, oh my God. Because like she couldn't do anything. She's so used to being this big, intimidating person, because also Sarah herself is kind of big and intimidating, and she couldn't do anything, especially to, I love you, Little Miss Anxiety here, who for the first time in her life showed pulled no punches.
Yeah.
If you're one of those people who's good at reading your players and your characters, an enemy like this probably is really good for you. It says evil therapist powers at the bottom because that is what she did.
That's what I was doing.
She literally was like, oh, I love just watching your characters have problems. And then she went, what if I did the opposite of what a therapist is supposed to do and just made you worse?
Yeah, I would just ask pointed questions at everything that they had just been dealing with. And I wouldn't let them escape.
And then also it looks like that.
Yeah.
I didn't fully realize that, and then she drew it, and I went, put that away.
It's also like 10 feet tall. It's alarming.
Yeah.
I like it. But overall, if you're trying to create a cosmic horror like that, just like play with the knowledge that you have as a DM and try to corner your characters with it, and you can do a lot. Okay, last in my section, we have one of my favorite villains that I've ever made. This is Gareth Knox. She is a werebear, and my players did not know that when they first met her, and that is like the whole point of what happened. And so Gareth is not an overall villain, like she's not a huge boss that anyone had to fight. She is a player-specific antagonist. I designed Gareth to upset and target Sloane's character, Corey.
For context, because this is very important, Corey's character concept is that she is a child of very famous adventurers, and I wanted to explore the misconceptions and the disconnect that a child would have about adventuring. I put her at 17, 18 because any younger than that, that's really messed up. But she still has this level of naivety to her that I explicitly looked at Liv and said, yeah, have fun with it. I'll save the rest.
Yeah, and so I looked at her character and I was like, oh, you want to be a hero, you want to have fun? And so I designed a character that would kind of crush that dream, is what I did. Only a little bit, though. And so her whole personality, her whole characterization, when I first introduced her, was meant to kind of cut off the things that Corey typically does. She's a teenager, she's loud, she's brash, she's rude. And so I was trying to make Gareth very calm and controlled. But what really made Gareth effective is that I knew Sloane's character's motivation. And so I made Gareth's motivation something that she would agree with. I essentially introduced this idea that Gareth had beef with Corey's parents and was around her as a character and was like, I don't like you inherently on principle, I don't like your parents. And Corey was like, well, that's stupid. They were famous adventurers. You probably just are intimidated by them. Wrong. Wrong. And Sloane did not know this, but she gave me freedom to play with her backstory, so I did. Her parents are the reason that Gareth is a werebear. They were trying to be moral. They were trying to save a kid from getting killed because the kid was a lycanthrope, and the lycanthrope bit Gareth instead and completely ruined her life. And now, 30 years later, she's insane enough that she saw Corey on the street and was like, I'm gonna pick this issue back up again, actually. And so I tried to make it something where her character, her motivation and her righteousness are something that Corey would agree with, because once Corey found out her story, she was horrified. And that was kind of the whole point.
Wait, I need to talk about what stood out.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Cut me off.
I did cut you off, I'm sorry.
I'm so mad it was valid beef to this day. I still think about no, really. Sloane was I told her that they were famous adventurers. It was a pretty decent childhood.
They couldn't have done anything wrong. They were
Reclusive,
heroes.
I can't imagine what she'd do. I'm never trusting her with my backstory again, is what I learned. Yeah, no. I can't believe it's valid beef.
That was the first thing she said when I revealed it. And I have revealed that this was valid beef when I cornered her into one-person combat against Gareth, who is a CR9 stat block monster against her, one level 7 player. My players made the mistake of splitting up, and she wandered off alone in the same city as Gareth. And I was like, oh, you sweet summer child. No, 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 no. And so I cornered her. And part of Gareth, too, is that her table presence itself was meant to make Sloane uncomfortable, not just Corey. So, like, we were playing in person, and I was just staring at her
We
the
were
entire
not
time.
all in person. Liv and I lived together. Everyone else was on Skype.
And so I would just spend, like, she'd be talking to other characters, and I would just sit and I would just stare at her while other people were talking.
On Skype.
On Skype. And any time Gareth was in a scene, that's just what she was doing. She was watching Corey. She kind of had her head tilted to the side. Corey would say something, she'd just go, and that's it. Like, it was just designed to make Sloane really uncomfortable because she kept being like, I'm in danger and I don't know why. She, in fact, was in danger. And the thing about Sloane is that she is a very, very smart D&D player. She's very, very good at being strategic, and she loves being strategic. And so with Gareth, I wanted to set up a combat that wasn't impossible. It was a combat that she was designed to lose, but it was a combat that was meant to force her into using every single one of her strategies and meant to force her into using every single bit of her kit so that she could try to get out of it. And just to showcase that this like actually worked, Gareth had like 160 something hit points.
It was like 165, 67.
Yeah, and Corey got her down to 27 before she dropped.
Yeah, guys.
It was absurd, and part of this design was I tried to create like different things that Corey could do. So I knew she had magic weapons; she could actually damage a werebear. Awesome. I knew I set up this combat to be in a public area with different environmental levels, so that she could try to run, she could hide, she could try to get help. She had different things that she could do, and I tried to make sure that there were things that she could do that were flexible in this scene. But at the same time, I didn't pull any of my punches, so I started off with a bite attack that cursed her.
What class was she?
Eldritch Knight. Yeah, no, Shield didn't do its job.
Yeah, she put up a shield on the first attack.
And then it was a 28.
And then she failed her save.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a phenomenal combat, and I loved it personally because normally, sorry, Rachel, I'm sitting in combat going, God, why does it take you so long? It, like, pay attention. We can have our turns done if we were all just, like, looking and knew what we were doing. And then I was alone, and I didn't have that time to think, nor did I know there was going to be combat. So she was like, yeah, and then she attacks you, and I went, oh my God.
She just kept looking at me like, really? And I was like, mm-hmm.
She's like actively rolling dice. Yeah, what's up?
Was Gareth like a barbarian?
Yes. Yeah, Gareth was a barbarian werebear.
Yeah, no.
Sorry,
it was-
also a dire werebear, so she was really big. She had a base boosted stat block.
But it was a phenomenal combat, and I'm really proud of Liv for it also, because combat's one of the things she doesn't feel as confident in, and it was so well designed. The fact that the streets had different tiers, so like there was an opportunity for fall damage if I could somehow get a werebear
bear
to
on a
fall. Yeah, get a bear on a roof. There were opportunities to call for help, which is eventually what I ended up doing. When it's one-on-one combat, people like really check out like the other people who are playing. But I remember we were playing and I was like, ah, shit, I'm losing this. And I went, wait a second, there are people around. So I cast Thunder Wave, and she went, that doesn't knock Gareth back. Her strength mod's like an 8. And I said, that wasn't for Gareth. That was for the 300-foot boom that Thunder Wave emits. Please, for the love of God, have someone come out of their house.
And I did, because it was a brilliant move, and that was the whole point, is I wasn't trying to punish Sloane. I was trying to like play in the space with Sloane, really, is I wanted to create a challenging combat. And so overall, moral with Gareth is that target, if you're wanting to make a player-specific antagonist, be really specific. Design them for that character.
I love combat. No one else really in our group does. If she had done this to anyone else,
It would not have gone well.
they would have probably like been
Cried.
like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. It would have been really unfair. They would have been like, I feel cornered. Why are you doing this to me? But if you know your player as well, you can also make an antagonist that targets your player. So Gareth was meant to highlight Sloane's strengths, but she was also meant to highlight Corey's flaws. And so you can play with a lot with that. With that, I'm going to stop talking now.
And now it's my turn, and I am standing up for this. Thank you for joining in my wonderful tradition of introducing the Barty Boys and then derailing everything. They are what happened when I got sick of DMing, and I was like, God, I want to play a bard, and then I decided to play 6. And I don't know if the faces look kind of familiar to you, but I'm going to introduce you, starting with the back left. That's Zane Malice. Next to him is Chris Evans. We have Dylan O'Boy. Then in the front row, you have Harrison Pother, Brandon Hurry, and Perry Jackson. Their original design was for me to teach my players that you can solve conflict in D&D without violence, and then they tried to solve it with violence anyway. But they didn't finish the job. I'm gonna make that abundantly clear. They said, "You suck." One punch. I was like, I don't have a stat block for them. I was like, yeah, he falls. And they were like, great, we're gonna spit on him and leave. So then I brought them back, and I was like, fine, you wanna solve this problem with violence? We can solve this problem with violence. But the issue is there's 6 of them, and anyone who's tried to run a really big and complicated group combat knows that it gets bogged down, you get frustrated, you, the DM, are now taking 5 minutes almost per per stat block that you have to try to figure out, what does this one do again? And I wasn't gonna have that. I wanted these boys to be scary, because we had to stop playing after I introduced them, because we laughed for 45 minutes, and then someone was like, yeah, I'm gonna talk to Zane Malice. And I was like, okay, we're just gonna call it quits. It's late enough anyway. So for the Bardy boys, what I ended up doing was streamlining their stat block. They're all bards, based off of genuine bards. So they all, at their core, have the same concepts. Gave them one spell sheet, so I didn't have to start going, wait, this one is this spell, this one is this spell, how am I gonna do this? But I also gave them roles, so they all shared a spell list, but not all of them were gonna use it. I had a couple of them who were on support, I had a couple of them who were tanking, a DPS, so on and so forth. And then on top of them actually supporting one another instead of just being swing, miss, swing, hit, make a dex save. I was also exhausting my action economy. They're bards, they have bardic inspiration, and I also had a bard who wasn't using her bardic inspiration ever.
I learned really fast during this fight.
And by virtue of exhausting the action economy and being able to just know what they were gonna do before I had to get to them, I was done with my turns in 2 minutes, and my players were back to going, shit, they cast silence, I don't know what to do. Why are they all the way over there? That's almost 300 feet away, how do we get there? And I was like, yeah, guys, maybe you should have solved it the first time. But really, when you get to those stat blocks that you're either making or finding, if it has a bonus action, if it has a reaction, if it has a legendary action, they're not there to make your stat block look cool, they are there for you to use it. You should be going hard every single time you're running a combat, because otherwise you're not really going to scare your players. You're going to be like, oh, I'm scared of killing them. You have to try way harder than you think to kill your players.
Can confirm.
And the Bardy boys, despite the fact they look like that, hit really hard. I don't actually know how close I got, but I do know that by the time we were done with the combat, Sarah, my big, tall, 6'4" best friend, was like, I'm going to cut his head off. He's staying down this time.
Yeah, the most memorable thing about the Bardy boys is definitely that they looked like that, and they actually had a really scary combat. I'm still really offended by that, because we're like, oh, they're stupid bards, they're fine. And then we got into combat with them, and we're like, oh, fuck. Wait, they're gonna kill us.
Healing and counterspell really threw them
Oh
for a
my
loop.
god, yeah. And that was what really stood out to me about this fight, is that it genuinely felt like fighting another adventuring party, like another group of players were challenging us instead of just Sloane running 6 bards. And it was so smooth, and they were so coordinated in what they were doing that they had us really and truly scrambling. We were trying to figure out how to deal with them, and we had to make less than ideal decisions in order to get there. We did eventually, but we're never going to forget that they looked like that, and they almost killed us.
This is Roar and Kriska. They are probably one of my favorite NPCs I've ever made, and I cannot articulate this enough. They are an antagonist. They are not a villain. They're essentially a hill turn. So if you've ever met those people, if you remember those people, and when you were in school, whatever age you want to pretend you were, who showed up to class in a suit for no reason, that's Roarin. And the thing about Roarin is that I designed them to be a weak link in this bigger, broader organization that supports the BBEG for my campaign. Because Roarin is the right-hand man, but Roarin's also an egotistical little bitch. They think because they can kiss ass and they I got this really influential position, that they are just the bee's knees and that anything they want goes. Which makes them kind of miserable to be around already. But again, they leave their top secret notes out in their unlocked bedroom. They yap and blab a little bit more than they probably should. They present this very unique opportunity for my players to get insight into what's going on in this otherwise opaque institution. But Roran, again, also thinks they're tip-top. They're gonna get everything. They're gonna be the next person in charge. So when they look at the players and they go, you're shady, your actions directly threaten my goals, they also represent then the first hard consequence my players actually are probably gonna face. Because everyone else is like, oh, you're so small. And Roran's looking at them going, if you so much as get in my way, I will make sure you never get to see the light of day again. And that's the kind of character that normally D&D tables decide they're just gonna kill, they're gonna throw them in the river, and we're just gonna be like, oh my god, no, I haven't seen them. That's crazy. But that opportunity for insight makes Roran kind of invaluable. Every time Roran shows up, my players are like, what can we get out of them? But that doesn't really explain why Roran's an antagonist and why they're my favorite NPC and why they make my players foam at the mouth every time they show up. And that is the last point on the screen. It is their table presence, which I didn't realize when I first made them. We actually put Roran on this, and we spent a solid probably 45 minutes going, why do you guys hate Roran so much?
we really had to think about it.
And it's because Roran tells my players that they're dumb and ugly with everything but their words. It is the difference between me, Sloane, going, oh my god, yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, you can find the answer to that across the river. There's a library. I don't know if you've ever been, but up front, it's got all of these great books that you can read. That's really friendly. That's really nice. But with Roran, that's almost a direct quote, actually. When Roran said it, it was a little bit closer to, hold on. So, right across the river, there's a library. I don't know if you've ever been, but right up front, all of the books you need are right there. For free. You can go read them. Anyway, I'll take you to your hotel now. And Roran really did just ask them, hey, do you know how to read? And it worked.
Every time.
It was the first interaction they really had with Roran. And every time since, it's gone about the same. They've been like, hey, Roran. And Roran's like, die. Pretty much like that. Yeah. And it's hysterical to me because Roran's not scary. Roran holds almost no power, but then they'll be in different towns with people from this organization. They'll go, is Roran here? Is this the time we get to kill them? And then they have the opportunity and they're like, we can't kill Roran. They hold too much information. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that when you make an antagonist, you can make them invaluable by giving them a value that your players really need. Make them threatening by making them a representation of consequences, and then make them miserable to be around with your table presence. And your players are going to eat it up, because as much as they don't like Roran, they love to hate Roran.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I am constantly surprised by how much venom I hold in my heart for Roran, but also how much I just want to see them around. Genuinely, every time we go to a new place, we're like, is Roran here? They're the first person we look to, even when the actual BBG is around. And so it just goes to show that that table presence is really powerful. For me, I hate them because they're a narc. And they snitch on us constantly, and have every opportunity. They are genuinely going to try and get us in trouble when we've been flying pretty smooth for the most part, unseen, unbothered. And then Roran came along and was like, hey, I think you're stupid, also stop. It's the worst. That specific combination is the worst.
Roran's also kind of a representation of someone who does exist in real life, right?
Yeah.
Let's be so real with ourselves. But again, bringing that table presence out and making sure that you're utilizing all of your tools. It's eye contact, or in Roran's case, lack thereof, tone, and those pauses where it's clear Roran's thinking about what they're about to say next, because what they want to say is going to get their ass beat. You can really get across how this person feels, what they want, without them actually needing to say it. It's like those Mean Girls in those high school films where they're like, oh my god, your shoes are so cute. really play with it. Make sure that your players, especially if you play in person, it works so much better in person, but it helps when you're also playing online. We play online and they still hate Roran because half the time I like really exaggerate. I just kind of look up and down and go, "Aw, no." All right. How we doing? Oh, not bad.
We're doing pretty okay. This is the body horror warning.
Oh, yeah. So this is Cardis Brown Barrel, and if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I would not have put Cardis on this panel. Not because he's not a good villain, as we finally broke him down. I was like, oh my God, you're right. But because he didn't take that much work to me. We've done this panel quite a few times, and as we were breaking it down, I was like, I don't know, Liv. What do I call you?
Either one.
I don't know, Liv. Like, it's just, I didn't work that hard. I didn't think that much about it. And she's like, because you used this process so much at this point that he was second nature to you. This is with a different group of people. We play in person in DC, and every time they come over now and we're playing, they're like, God, do you remember Cardis? And I'm like, yeah? I mean, he was just a guy.
He's just a messed up little dude.
Except, as we went over it, I realized that's not true. So, unlike Arya, who is an exercise in what can happen when you contrast your direct and indirect characterization, Cardis is an example of what happens when they align perfectly. I wanted to make a messed up little guy, and so I did. His story is essentially that, actually no, we'll do this differently. My players had no idea who he was. The town they were in had no idea who he was. He was forgotten, lost to time, and my players just slowly started uncovering his home, his story, and inside his home, he had a bunch of just horrifying things. He had a room full of dead people's clothing, not their bodies, just the clothing, that was so full you couldn't really open the door. He had a study.
Correct response.
He had a study that had these beautiful portraits of him and this other human woman, which was weird because there were no humans in this town where my players were. There were zombies and undead all throughout his home, which is weird. Why do you want to live with that? And as they started finding these secret rooms, they found his study, and it was trashed, absolutely trashed. There was paper all over the floor, handwritten notes, paper that just said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But also things addressed to my dearest Callie, the love of my life. Things that said, I'm so sorry for what I've done, but Damien deserved it. And just, you're going through it, and I already don't really want to be in this man's house, and I made it. But my players had no choice, so they keep going, and then they not only find more about this man, they find his display room, where they find Damien's corpse tacked up to the wall like a little butterfly up for display, framed with a little museum plaque that said, Damien Lloyd.
I cannot emphasize enough. I was like, hey, are there stains on the wall? Did he just put the full body on the wall and let it decay into a skeleton? And she was like, yeah.
So you're getting a good concept of who Cardis is, but we've not met Cardis. 5 minutes later, when they walk up the stairs, they get into his main chamber, and he's kneeling on the ground with the emaciated version of this woman who had a portrait in his home, talking to her. It looks like this, essentially. He's this, short little halfling, and my players are just oh, no. I was hoping maybe something would be a little different, but that's exactly what we expected.
Yeah, it's just through the process of learning about Cardis and his house, I was like, oh, this man is insane. This man has lost it. And then it just kept getting worse, which I was very impressed by. Even during the actual combat, he kept doing things. And I was like, you're so much scarier than I thought you were going to be. You were just so messed up. And it was really impressive and really fun getting to learn about this character and have all that buildup of tension before ever getting there. And then having the payoff be so worth it because it was still a step above of what I was expecting.
So, with Cardis, I wanted to make a messed up little guy. And in terms of his personality and the characterization, mission accomplished. But it would really suck then if I did such a good job at making his home, making all this indirect characterization, and then when they met him, he was just like, what's up, guys?
How's it going?
That wouldn't be as fun or as creepy as I wanted. So, especially again, in person, your body language and your expressions really come through a lot better. I I wanted to make him scary. So he was sitting there, he was kneeling in a body of water talking to a corpse, like it was a real person, and he just kind of looks up with the world's blankest expression. There was no eye contact. It was a 1,000-yard stare no matter who I was talking to. And he spoke really softly. He spoke like the other people in the town. He was local, like he was a person, but the way he then presented himself afterwards and the things he had done made it very obvious that whoever Curtis Brown Barrel was is no longer who he is. If you see it down at the bottom, I am not doing this in person. It says genuinely threatening Minnesotan accent. Like, yeah, I don't really know how I did it, but she insists that it was scary.
The first time I've ever heard a Minnesotan accent, I've been like, ooh, hold on. Wait.
And what's worse is like they walked in and they are the exact kind of people that Curtis hates. On the last slide it said like travelers to this town are like what took his love from him. He's not going to allow that to happen again. So they show up and he's like, oh, new people. And he just stands up and he has absolutely no opportunity to like talk with him, to engage. It is immediate combat straight out of the gate. And he has clear logic to his targets. Like he's not out here just going, destroy everything, I don't care. He is looking at my bard, who is dumb enough to walk in looking like the love of his life, first, because, you know, how dare he? And then he's going after my wizard, who is the next most threatening thing to Curtis as a, like, spellcaster. He was out here to kill them, so I was out here to kill them. I had a stat block that was probably a little too hard for them, and I was casting spells like Counterspell that they didn't have access to yet. So there was no counterspelling the counterspell. My wizard was mostly useless for that combat. And I almost downed both the bard and the wizard, and it made this tension for my rogue and my fighter who were like, oh my god, if we don't get this done, like we are actually going to die. So when you like are running that combat, he was also talking during it. Like I can't explain that enough. Like I had one character where I was like, oh, he's talking during combat. My players were like, that's horrifying. I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this all the time now. So he's muttering to himself. He's cursing the bard who's like disguised as the love of his life. And then also he's like, I'm gonna kill you. I know exactly who I'm gonna kill, and I'm not scared of them. I'm not. So you and me right now, we're dueling. Except he's stronger than you, so good luck.
The genuinely not sure how Sloane pulled off a frightening Minnesotan accent. I like a lot of the table presence, that like expression, the like body acting, the commitment really did a lot, especially because Sloane is very good at like changing her use of pauses and her intonation on certain words, and it makes each of her characters feel very unique. And in this case, even though we had so much buildup demonstrating that this man was absolutely nuts and that we should be very scared of him, he still came straight out of the gate with his highest level spell and almost took two of us out. And I just wasn't ready for it because we walked into the room trying to be like, oh, maybe we can like sneak our way out of this fight. Maybe we can get our... No, there was absolutely no reasoning with this man. He bopped out and said, ice, wall of ice?
No, it wasn't wall of ice. I think it was it was a 5th level spell.
It was something, and we were like level 3. I am also the wizard that kept getting counterspelled, and so I had to sit here in this fight and be comfortable with the fact that my job was to prevent him from having reactions so that my fighter and my rogue could try to take him out. And that was the position that we were put in, because we were like, this man is going to kill one of us unless we are cool with just eating up some of his spells and eating up some of that damage and just trying to keep ourselves up. And so it made this whole combat so memorable for me because it felt like a huge boss fight in a video game. And I feel like that's very hard to achieve with D&D.
It fell. Oh my god. I will say, I'm pretty sure he also had shield, so eating his reaction was very important.
Yes.
It was a strategy that they picked up, and I was very impressed because also 2 of them are very new to D&D. Again, they're level 3. I was like, oh, we'll teach you how to play D&D. And then I was like, oh, you know, I'll make Cardis. And they're like, I don't know that I like D&D that much anymore. But as you've seen, when you bring it all together, and especially when you practice this and you start analyzing, I'm not using the microphone, and you start analyzing villains, it kind of starts becoming second nature. I really didn't sit here with Cardis and go, oh my god, I had a story I wanted to tell. I had like a concept, and Cardis was just what happened afterwards. But because I had the table presence, because I was willing to basically kill my players And I had such a clear idea of what I wanted the environment to say versus what I wanted Cardis to be like and like who he was. He became this like super memorable villain that, again, Liv's played with me for
It's been a long
5
ass
years. And she's like, no, Cardis is one of my favorite villains that you've ever done. I find the structure very helpful, these like points for you to hit, and you don't have to hit all of them when you're making a villain. The Barty Boys were only their stat block and, you know, their faces.
That's true.
And like they were still really memorable. My players hate them. I had terrible RP with them because there were 6 of them in a room at any given time. But when you start working on it and you start perfecting this piece and then that piece and then combining them, your villains, it really starts to become second nature to make something very compelling, even if it's, you feel like you're like, I don't know, I just made a guy.
Yeah, all of the things that we've talked about here today are tools that you can use and combine in different ways. It's not like a rubric. And so, like, for example, when I first started off and I was not comfortable with combat, most of my villains still to this day are stronger in the like characterization department than they are in the stat block department. Like, I have designed good combats, it's just not my favorite thing. So there are a lot of ways you can mix and match all of the things that we've talked about and to build a compelling villain that works for what you need the villain to do and also is going to be fun for your players to experience.
Slide. And we actually have a question slide now.
Yay!
This is also a small plug because people kept asking us when we were doing this panel. We do now have a place where we host like PowerPoints and presentations and stuff. We made a website. It's very sparse because it's very new. You don't have to go to it. You don't have to look at it. But people were asking us, and I was like, no, I have a cosplay Instagram, and that's it. So, while everyone, if you want to take a picture, feel free. If not, we're opening the floor to questions.
What do you recommend? Sorry. What do you recommend for DMs who are either not great performers of characters, or maybe playing through an online platform that, even if you're a great performer, is like really not conducive to acting and you know all the body language stuff that can deliver whatever it is about your villain that's going to make the villainous. What are some other ways, maybe mechanically, or that don't rely on personification to deliver either terror or just real punchable face?
Yeah. So to repeat the question to make sure everyone could hear it, he was essentially asking if you're not like very strong in acting or you don't have the opportunity to bring out that table presence for your players, how do you still convey that personal aspect, that personality? How do you make that punchable face? How do you make that scary villain? And to this, I would kind of say, don't forget that as a DM, you are also kind of a narrator. And so you can just describe what this person is doing. Doing the table presence, doing the voice, doing the body language is still really impactful, but also saying this person is staring at you and they do not see you. Like just trying to describe with some of your words can really help offset that. I did that a lot when I first started DMing because I wasn't comfortable with the actual acting aspect of it, and I'm still not super comfortable with it, so I will oftentimes describe mannerisms or describe how this person is moving. You still have that ability as a DM to create that like immersion and create that atmosphere.
Also, sometimes you still have to clarify, even when you are doing your best to act. I work for the government. I am not an actor. There are times I stare at people and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm trying to like get the point across that like he's looking past you, not at you. And they're like, oh, yeah, no, okay, I see it now. Like, sometimes you have to clarify, even in person. Like, people don't always get it. Also, if it's like a voice call and there's no video at all, we don't play that way, but we actually had someone last year when we did this panel talk to us about how he uses the microphone and his distance from the microphone to really like emphasize when someone's whispering, or he'll get really close and make it really miserable for everyone to listen to.
Yeah.
And how you can play with like your settings on your computer also. I am not a computer whiz. I would literally be just like moving things. I don't have like a voice changer that people use when they're like streaming or anything. But I feel like those are also for people who are maybe a little more tech savvy, some options.
Yeah, I think too, if you're trying to get across something with a character, don't forget the power of just pauses and changing the speed at which you're speaking, like that alone can make a character feel individual and feel unique and can get across a lot of their personality without you having to like know how to do an accent or really put emotion into your voice. Like there are a lot of different things that you can do between descriptions and between just trying to differentiate that character a little bit that can still give you a really good impression of who they are. Yes?
As a player, in general circumstances, whether it's like a personalized villain for your character or the GM just throwing something to the party, how can we as players also, like, I guess, help the GM elevate their villain?
That is such a great question.
Hold on, wait. I'm going to think for a second before I just say the first thing.
Okay, I mean, the question I hope everyone heard was how do you as players help the GM elevate their villain? The main thing I can say is just like engage very sincerely. That is what made Gareth so effective as an antagonist, is that Corey saw everything she was doing and was interested. Like she didn't stop interacting with Gareth. She kept pursuing all the breadcrumbs I was putting down. Because with Gareth, I kept being like, hey, I know things about your parents, you don't remember them. Hey, I can tell you a story about your parents. Hey, you don't know who they actually are. Like just little things like that. And rather than just going, you're sketchy, I'm not going to talk to you, she was like, no, I'll bite. I want to know more. And like just that willingness to engage and like actually make those hard decisions with your character and be willing to be put in uncomfortable situations by your DM really makes a big difference.
Be willing to play a little stupid is really what I'm going to say. No, like I was in danger and I was like, yeah, there's obviously something here. Like it's an engaging format for storytelling. It's like video games. And in video games, the plot makes you make kind of suboptimal decisions. You're not allowed to be like, yeah, you're right, that is really dangerous. Let me just not do it. So like as a player, like please be willing to engage. It helps your DM also feel far more comfortable putting these kinds of things in front of you. If my players had walked into Cardis's home, been like, oh, that's a room full of bloody clothes, never mind, I would have been like, come on. Like,
Yeah.
this is obviously where you're meant to be. It like makes a world of difference. You don't have to be the best actor, but when you see the plot threads, go for it. If you're like, actually, there's something in the back of my brain scratching saying, go this way, it's okay if you waste a little bit of time and it's actually nothing. Your DM will either tell you, you'll find out really quickly, or you'll find that thing that your DM was like, oh my God, I hope they do this.
I think last thing, and then we'll get to your question in the back, is that try to think from your character's perspective as well, because as a player, you have obviously your things that you want to do, and you can be like, I want to kick this villain's ass, like I want to win this interaction. But that's not always the most interesting thing for where your character is at. And so like if Sloane hadn't been willing to kind of lose that fight, like obviously she put up a really difficult fight, but she realized that she was probably going to lose it.
I lost the RP fights. I didn't, in my heart and soul, I did not lose the actual fight.
No, the actual fight she didn't lose. She lost the RP fights, but she was willing to let that happen because she wasn't sitting there being like, no, my character's not going to respond. You can't get to them. Like if it's something that your character would genuinely get upset about or something that would get to your character, like let it stand. Don't just be like, no, you can't get to me this time actually, because that's no fun. That's no fun.
Yes.
What I had wasn't actually a question. It was sort of also a response to this as a DM.
Yeah.
And it's that as a player, encourage your DM to have fun with their villains, because I've had players who, if I had a situation like with Hardin, they'd be like, oh, this is a really messed up house. And then they'd light it on fire. Care of the villain, yes, but I would never get to put all the work that I put into the villain on screen.
Yeah.
Or like, if you get to the villain and they're having a conversation, don't talk over your DM as you're playing with random combat. Or don't be like, oh, we don't have time to monologue. I surprise attack. But let your DM have fun with the villains that they make, because that encourages them in turn to make more interesting villains. But if you always rush in and you're like, I'm smarter than that, I'm a better D&D player, whatever, I can solve this easily, and you don't let them like actually show you the whole breadth of the villain, then the next time when they're making a villain,
Yeah.
they're going to make something really flat and easy to defeat, and without a lot of characterization, because they know that you're not going to let them show it off.
That is very true. I hope that everyone heard that. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will say I'm happy to sit in here still until they kick us out, but we are 5 minutes over. So, group poll. If anyone wants to chit chat, do you want to do it in the hallway or do we want to stay in here? Hallway? Slay.
Hallway. Okay, cool.
All right. Thanks for coming,
Thanks, guys. Thank you guys for taking your decrepit husks all the way out here on a morning. We really appreciate it.